Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I want to talk to you guys about Doug Pederson's press conference at the 2024 NFL Owners Meeting. Some things we learned, anything we could put together really from the comments. This was our first press conference from the team following free agency. So we got our initial thoughts from the head coach, talking about maybe where some of these players might play, talking about their process, maybe giving some insight as well into what could happen in the draft. It was a very long press conference. I recommend to you all, go watch it. It's like 37 minutes. So a lot longer than what you usually get, right? And so we got a lot more answers than I was really expecting to get this morning. But we're going to kick things off first by talking about Darnell Savage. And at the end of this video, I'm also going to just give you guys an updated needs list. Based off this, I think some things changed there as well. So we'll get to that at the very end. But one of the first things that I took away from the press conference was that Doug Pederson and Ryan Nielsen unequivocally see Darnell Savage as the team starting nickel. I think that is very clear at this point. And I think things have pointed towards that early on since they acquired him. And we got confirmation this morning that that is going to be the case. And as far as how I feel about this, I feel very good about it. Like, I think this is where Savage should be playing. And when you take players, and I'm stealing this quote from someone, I wish I could remember who it was, but when you take players from good football organizations like the Green Bay Packers, you have to be convinced that they're being used in the wrong way and that you have a better plan for them. And one of the things we talked about when Savage was brought in was that the Green Bay Packers defense coordinator, I think it was Joe Barry, when he was talking about the way Darnell Savage was being used, he said that he felt like he would be a really good nickel defender, like one of the best in the NFL, but they did not have the ability to put him there because they had bigger needs at safety and they valued that position. And so Darnell Savage was forced to play at safety instead of playing in a spot where they felt he was much better. And so I think for Jacksonville, like, what you're looking at is you're bringing in a guy that you think still has a ton of upside. He was a first round pick. He finished off his career really well in Green Bay in the playoffs. And now you're going to put him in a role that you think he's going to be better in. And so I very much like this for Jacksonville. I think he's a really good slot cornerback. Now, I mean, I've talked about before, I like to have guys there that can kick outside ideally, but this is all right. You know, I think you've got enough people in the secondary all over. You could figure something out. And, you know, talking about Antonio Johnson as well, I think if, you know, Savage does end up getting hurt, which I don't think has been a huge problem in his career, you know, Antonio Johnson, we know he can kick into the nickel. We know he can play there, and we know we have safeties behind that. So I feel really good about this. The second thing, though, was talking about Antonio Johnson. And basically what the Jaguars said, and they did not go out and, you know, say this right off the bat or say this is like clear as day, obvious this is going to happen. But they said that right now, Antonio Johnson is the starting safety for this team opposite of Andre Cisco. So probably going to be the strong safety more so. This makes sense, obviously. The Jaguars, when they drafted him, originally said that he is a safety when they were asked if they see him as a nickel or playing in the safety position. They have, I think, changed their mindset a little bit to where they said that maybe there's a little bit of competition for that nickel position. I think the reality behind that is what they're trying to say is that maybe Antonio Johnson isn't as 100% secure in that safety position as what we think. And really where I've derived this, and I've thought this for a while, and maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I'm going to get that out of the way. Like, I would preferably want Antonio Johnson be the starting strong safety. I think he would be great there. It'd be a phenomenal addition for the Jaguars, especially in the 5th round. But I want to go back to them being a 5th round pick because I think that says a lot about how the team's going to view that player. Clearly, as good as he was to the fans and to, you know, draft experts, Antonio Johnson was the 160th overall selection or so. So in that case, the Jaguars were clearly not as high on him as what the fan base was, as NFL scouts were. And so how they look at him is very different because they're looking at him as a player that maybe needs more development, maybe isn't there fully. But Antonio Johnson, obviously, when he played, to not many people's surprise, was really good. He was one of the best defenders on the team when he was out on the field. It was just a very limited amount of time until late in the season. So I think they're kind of talking about this like, maybe he's still got to earn the starting role. Maybe it's a little bit of coach speak, just trying to make it seem that way when it's not going to be that way. You've got to have someone there in the draft to take if he's going to get challenged. I think realistically, like, the only player that I could see maybe beating him out for a starting job at safety might be like if they drafted Tyler Nubin. So I'm not sure there's a ton of options there, but I do think this indicates to me that this is not 100% for sure. They might even consider a trade for someone if, say, a player like, I don't know, Javon Holland became available. That would be a really good addition. We talked about that on our potential trade candidates video, although Miami is in a much better cap situation now after letting their players go. But there's the possibility they might go like trade for someone, they might draft someone. We'll see. I just don't think this is like a 100% for certain kind of thing. Now, as far as talking about their process, which really a lot of the rest of this isn't as much player related, it's more so about just why the Jaguars did what they did. One thing that Doug Pederson stressed was that they focused on acquiring players with postseason experience. I think this makes sense for them because they obviously feel like this team is not matured enough yet to be able to win in those big moments, to be ready to compete late in the season. That's something they've emphasized, that Jacksonville needs to change. And it's fair to say because we've been a team that's not been relevant late in the season for a very long time. It's not, some sort of hidden truth, right? Everyone knows that. And so bringing in guys, like Mitch Morse and Gabriel Davis, played a lot of playoff games. You talk about Eric Armstead. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. Darnell Savage, huge player for the Green Bay Packers in the postseason this last year, had a pick 6 against Dallas. Now, game was a blowout, right? But that was the play that really blew it out of proportion and led to Green Bay dominating them. So you get a lot of guys like that, right? A lot of players who have a ton that they can offer as far as postseason experience and know what a winner looks like. And so that makes a lot of sense for what they talk about and the things they feel like need to change. Of course, your own players should be learning this. You should be able to coach up your team well enough to where you don't have to bring in these kinds of guys and you can just go out and get the best players available, even if they're off a team that, maybe they're not as good. Like you can make that argument for, what if you really like Mike Onwenu? He doesn't have postseason experience, but he's a really good player. Just throw out a random guy. So I like the idea, but I think by this point in this tenor, you would think that we would have plenty of postseason experience to be able to get by. But obviously, when you go 1-5 at the end of the year and you collapse and you don't make the postseason, things change. And so that's something that has to change. And hopefully this team will be able to find their way back. He also talked about how they want to motivate this team based off that 1-5 finish. And I think that they absolutely have to. Because if they just forget about that, if they don't care, they're going to fall into the same mistakes. And this is a team that has consistently hurt itself in the same exact ways, over and over and over. I think one thing I've felt for a long time, whether it's true or not, I've felt like the Jaguars have had pride issues when they became good. I think they've been bad for so long that when they're good, they just desperately want to be among the best, even if they haven't completely earned it. And so they act that way. Last year, actually it would be 2 years ago, I remember going on our podcast after playing against the Detroit Lions, which was the game where Lawrence got hurt and then came back and we got blown out, where, I felt like, before this team went on the huge winning streak, like they had an issue with letting the things that were said about them that were good get to their heads. And so they have to keep that chip on their shoulder all season. And I don't mean just the first 12 games. I mean the whole way through. Because when you let off, things like last year happen. And so I don't think it's shocking that they're talking about this as motivation. And that's probably the best thing that you can do with that. Because if you forget about it, you're probably just going to fall into the same thing. It's got to make you hurt to make change. So that was another takeaway. One big thing that was said about this team schematically, and I also got a lot of input from fans kind of correcting this comment, because we usually, when I say 3-4 or 4-3, I'm usually thinking about the front. I'm not thinking about, how many linebackers are there, how many guys in the secondary are there. But they indicated that the Jaguars are going to be a 4-man kind of front. I apologize for that. Yep, there we go, on silent. They're going to be a 4-man front, right? So you're going to have Trayvon playing with his hand in the dirt a lot. That's going to be a really good change for him. I think you're going to see him be a much better football player than the way he already is. Josh Allen, same thing for him. Not going to be dropping into coverage nearly as much, I would imagine. Then you're going to have Eric Armstead and Devon Hamilton in the middle. And so that's a really good group of starters. I do think looking at it right now, you want to add more depth there ideally. You have enough this year to get by. I just think you're at the point with the defensive line where, as much as it's good to not have like clear, glaring holes, there's a lot of levels you can go to with the defensive line, because you've got a lot of rotation you got to go through. If you can keep adding players and you have the ability to get those guys, you want to keep adding players. I'm not saying go out and pay someone, but let's say we get to the draft and Chris Jenkins is there in the second round. I am absolutely considering drafting him, because I know that it would be nice to have a better rotation in the middle instead of, maybe like Tyler Lacey having to take a bunch of snaps. So that's kind of where Jacksonville is, but you're going to get a lot of these 4-3 looks, and you're also probably more so, and this was the correction I got, you're going to get 4-2-5 looks. So what that means, you have 4 men on the defensive line, you have 2 linebackers, and you've got your nickel package. So you've got your slot cornerback, your 2 outside cornerbacks, and you got 2 safeties. That is probably going to be something that we see Jacksonville run a lot. So if we're looking at the depth chart, what does that take out? It's probably going to be Chad Muma, right? So you look at this team, I mean, if everyone stays healthy, there's all the pieces there. I just think the clear thing that's going to stand out to me, and we'll see where it ends, is that the depth, it's not there as much as I want. I think they've done a good job of, if everything goes right, having their guys. But if someone goes down, I think they're in a pretty rough situation. And that's always going to be the case, but you want to minimize it. I don't think they have a ton of depth over a lot of the defense to really be able to make up for a lot of losses. Now, one thing as well, talking about just places where the Jaguars need to improve. Doug Pederson mentioned that one of the primary focuses they set for themselves this offseason was for the Jaguars to improve the run game. This is talking about run blocking. This isn't talking about Travis Etienne necessarily and how good of a rusher is he. I think they believe Tank Bigsby needs to improve. He had kind of a weird comment about it where he just sort of said that, to paraphrase, like some of the reps that Tank Bigsby took were awful. He just said it very weird, and if you go watch it, you'll know what I mean. But ultimately, it really comes down to run blocking, right? And so you saw, especially on the interior, that being an issue with Luke Fortner being a complete liability, and then his play impacting everyone around him because you have the guards taking over for his assignments and then worrying about their own guys. And so it just invites disaster. And so looking at that, it's interesting to me because if that's a top priority, you made one move, right? You brought in Mitch Morse, a very good addition, makes a lot of sense. I wish he was a better run blocker, but he'll still be fine. So if they want to improve the run game, it makes me think, with them going back to that point, there's probably going to be an addition in the draft at some point for a future starter on the offensive line. I think it could be a tackle. I think it could be a guard. I don't think it's center. I think that's very unlikely at this point. They still say things about Luke Fortner to try to act like they're somewhat committed to him. And so we'll see what the case is there. I just don't think they go get another center at this point, and then you'll maybe have like Mitch Morse, Zach Frazier, and Luke Fortner all in the same room. So that's probably kind of unlikely to me, but I do think that they're going to consider adding at the guard position and adding at tackle as well. And then finally, last thing I want to talk about was about wide receiver. Maybe the most important thing to take away from this, because the comment was when they asked him about how he felt about that room. I'll say this first of all. They barely talked about Calvin Ridley. I don't get why there weren't more questions asked. I hope that if Trent Baalke has another press conference, they ask him a lot of questions, because that was a disaster that needs to be answered for, because there were clear lies said in the media. When you say, hey, well, we don't really care what the compensation is, we're just trying to get a deal done, and then you specifically wait for the new league year to start for the compensation to change, and that specific thing causes you to lose out on your player, you know, whether or not you think he's worth $23 million, that is a disaster for the team. That makes them look like a clown show, and they lost to a division rival. You know, so that's a huge problem, and I think that needs to be asked about more. Maybe Doug Pearson's probably not the guy that you ask about it, but I do think that I was a little shocked they didn't really say much about Calvin Ridley leaving. And so, as far as what they did say about wide receiver, Doug Pederson, basically just to paraphrase what he said at first, was, we need to add wide receiver to this team. We absolutely need help. But that's because we need bodies for preseason when we have, you know, a 90-man roster. So I know that you have to combine some different things here when we're talking about this, right? Because it's not just that comment that's relevant. You know, there's a reason why they went out and traded for Calvin Ridley. There's a reason why they were close to paying him enough to stay here. There's a reason why they invest a lot of money at wide receiver. They do see that as a clear need for the Jaguars. But I think you also have to consider that as much as they care about that as a need, and as much as they want a wide receiver one, look at the way they're going about acquiring that position. We have not had a notable wide receiver pick in the draft since Trent Baalke came here. The closest argument is Parker Washington. And Parker Washington was picked at 185th overall, pretty sure. So not exactly a priority. So when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, yes, I can understand people saying, well, wide receivers absolutely needed them. They're going to consider it. But you also got to understand the comments that they make and the draft history there, because these are two people, in Trent Baalke and Doug Pearson, that are not good at picking that position. You know, and let's say they go out in the draft and they feel like they got to go pick one. You know, if there's three clear wide receiver ones, Trent Baalke can't trade up, right? He's incapable of sending enough to get a deal done. We've seen that a lot during his tenure. We saw it over and over last year. They tried trading up 20 times for Ventrell Miller, and they got rejected every single time. So, if that's the case, you know, I don't think you go get one of the top three. And then what happens, and I'm not trying to throw slander at Brian Thomas Jr., I like him a lot, he's a good prospect. But what happens if they go pick Brian Thomas Jr. and they say, you're the wide receiver one, you're the guy now, we picked you early, go get it done. And then he's not ready for that, because he's never been in that role, and he's still a player who just broke out last year. What happens if you ruin his career right off the bat because you're not good at making picks? You know, just using him as an example, not trying to kill him, not trying to say he's a bust. I don't think he's a bust, but I think it's something to note. If the Jaguars do feel like they have to go wide receiver in the first round, there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. And so I think they're going to be very specific about what scenarios they would go out and they would get a receiver in round one. And I think those are probably moving up and moving down. I think those are the two most likely outcomes for them getting a receiver of the future. So as far as how I think that changes things, I think as far as what we expect in the draft, safety is a little more likely. I think they had something there. I think you look at probably wide receiver being a little less likely, and then offensive line. I would bet right now that in the first 5 picks, one of those is offensive lineman. One of them is a guy that doesn't start year one, but they end up developing. Unless you're talking about them going and getting a tackle first round. Maybe they get a Marius Mims. Maybe they love him. I think that's a dark horse pick for Jacksonville. If they go get him, well, he's probably a starter. They probably move on from Cam Robinson. So I think that's kind of where we're going to end up falling. I just don't expect the early wide receiver to happen right now for Jacksonville based off the comments we've got in the draft history. So as far as needs, just talking about that, I think 2 needs stick out to me at the top of this list. First one's wide receiver 1. That's the chief need, biggest priority. And it's why, if you follow me on Twitter, I've talked a bit about players like Marvin Harrison Jr., which I know you have to move up a far ways for him. I know you got to give up future capital. You have to consider it, though, because if you're talking about this year, you're talking about getting things back on track, you need that guy. And if you get the right one, which I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is essentially bust-proof at this point, I just don't see that happening. I think his work ethic is too good. I think he's too good of a player. I think he would be a phenomenal fit for the Jaguars. If you go get a guy like that, or say it's Neighbors or Dunze, who I have a tier below, but still very good players, all of a sudden this team is very, very different. That's the most impactful addition that you can make. I think cornerback is still high on the list after this press conference. They didn't hit on it as hard, but I don't think they said they felt great about it either. I mean, I know they said they felt okay about the secondary at one point. I think they're still considering adding there. We're hearing rumors about it. We've heard them emphasize it. I don't think Ronald Darby, as much as he's good when he's on the field, changes it for them, especially when Tyson Campbell is going to be a free agent after this season. So I think those are the 2 positions where we need immediate guys that could come in and potentially start. You can survive, but these are the positions I think you get the most out of if you go bring guys in. But you also got a lot of future needs, and I hope that Jacksonville makes the change this year from saying, well, we've got everything sorted out. We have a great roster. Let's go get special teamers. Don't do that. Get your future guys. Go get an Amarius Mims, or maybe it's Kingsley Sumatea in the second round. I think they're going to need a right tackle going forward. Anton Harrison is going to be on the left side at some point in his career in that rookie contract. You need the guy on the right side. I don't think you should pay Cam Robinson a ton of money with how the contract's gone. And Walker Little, well, we don't know what he is. And if he's good, it's on the left side of the offensive line anyway, and Anton Harrison's going to beat him out for that job. You look at Brandon Scherf. He is not going to be here past this year. I just don't think that's going to be the case. So you're going to need a right guard. You look at linebacker. It sounds insane to say linebacker is a future need, but Foye Oluokan's got 1 year left. If you draft a guy, you can trade him. I do want to throw that out. Not that I want to trade Oluokan, but if that's a scenario and you go get a great player there, absolutely consider it. You save money, and you get a good draft pick in return because Oluokan is that good of a player. But Muma, we don't know what he is. At best, he's been rotational. And Ventrell Miller, one of the guys drafted for special teams, right? So we might need another linebacker in the near future. So I don't think it's terrible, to go out and get a guy. I know that's a very different opinion. I know most people don't agree with that. I know most people would probably break a TV if we drafted Edgerrin Cooper. But I do see where, despite all the capital invested, that could be a need in 2025. And then outside linebacker, even if Josh Allen stays, I think you want that third guy long term. I think you just want someone there. And it would be phenomenal if Jacksonville can go get a legit potential star player at that position. That's why, I wouldn't be mad if we went out and got Jared Verse. Is it my top option? No. But I like Jared Verse a lot. He's going to be a great player. You throw him in with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, that is a very different room that we're talking about. And like I noted down here, some of this can change, right? Specifically outside linebacker, because if we're talking about Josh Allen not getting a long-term deal done, and you got to trade him, which should not, I'll make this clear, should never be the scenario. Yet that is the scenario they have currently headed towards, although it can change. That is the direction we're heading. If Josh Allen's not here, all of a sudden, that need is as high as cornerback is. And you got to pay him if you want him to play this year, by the way, just in case you guys forgot. So that could very much change, but this is kind of where I have it sitting right now. So, with that all said, those are my thoughts from the press conference. This is how I have the depth chart right now, where I think players are going to play. I think a few things have changed. I think we learned more about what this team's going to look like. I think most of it's good news. But as far as the draft, we're going to have to see what happens. This is a weird team when it comes to the draft. They make weird decisions. And, first round will probably be great. We'll see what happens after, because they are very much hit and miss after that point, and a lot more misses than hits. So that's all I've got for you guys. I appreciate you watching today, taking the time to be here. If you got anything you want from me as far as content, let me know. We're going to have a lot of draft position rankings coming out here soon. So that's what I've got for you. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.